Once, there was a girl called Tippin, and she lived in her father's house with her stepmother, for her father had died some time ago. And she was a canny girl. She was very good at housework, and gardening, and cooking, and cleaning, and all kinds of things like that, because even though she was not more than 8 years old, her stepmother did not like her very much. Well, now, one day, when she was out at school, her stepmother wanted to make some sweets to sell in the marketplace. And she wanted to boil up a great big cauldron to boil the sweets in, but when she went to the woodpile, she found that they were totally out of wood. Well, what could she do? Of course, she had to go to the forest. And in the first part of the forest, there was absolutely nothing. Oh, dear. All the wood was all crumbled away into dust, it seemed, when she touched it. There was nothing, no kindling at all even. Nothing, just nothing. So she went into the middle part of the wood, and there all the branches that looked any good were too high up. Nothing had fallen. There was no wood that was good for burning, and still hardly any kindling. So she came to the middle part of the wood, the heart of the wood, where people hardly ever came from the village. And there at last, there were all kinds of wonderful dry wood. Well, they were almost log-sized, almost as if they had been meant to be there, and lots of kindling. Well, so much that once she gathered it and gathered it and gathered it and gathered it and roped it up, well, there was such a big pile of wood. Oh, there was no way that one person would ever be able to carry this and take it back to the village. And so, even though she had seen no sign of human being or habitation for miles now, she looked at the pile and she didn't want to leave it there. It would last her all next winter. Just on the off chance, she just shouted, "Friends, is there anyone at all out there who could help me with this pile of wood and take it back to my village?" And there was silence. Not a bird sang. Not a leaf crackled, not a single twig stirred in the wind. But she looked at the pile. It was such good wood, and she was quite greedy. She couldn't quite bear to take as much as she could carry and leave the rest. And this time she just shouted, "Is there anyone there at all who could help me with this wood?"
"I will help you, my dear, but I'll have to be paid."
And to her amazement, a strange, twisted, writhen old man appeared from out of the trees.
"What payment have you?"
I'm sure I can think of something when we get home, my dear sir."
"Right, my dear, you had better."
"Well, yes, of course, if you would help." And with a dreadful ease, he shouldered the entire burden and took it back to the stepmother's house. And he laid it in the woodpile. But then, when they came to the house, he said,
"And now, my dear, payment is due."
"My dear sir, I'm sure I can think of something. And she thought, and she thought, and she thought, but she didn't have anything. And the old man was starting to make her feel just a little bit nervous. And an idea popped into her head, as they do sometimes when you think quickly. And she said, how would you like a servant?"
"A servant?"
"Yes."
"Who? You?"
No, my dear sir. I've got a stepdaughter called Tippin. She's very good at housekeeping and gardening.
A girl?
And everything.
"A child?"
Yes. She's very competent. She's a very...
"I could do with a good servant in the wood."
She's a very hard worker."
"I cannot very well take her from here, can I?"
"No, I suppose not. Yes. Well, the children, every day when they come out from school, every day they congregate by the ford, the riverbank."
"But how will I know them apart? All children are the same to me."
"Well, she's called Tippin. If you call her name, and I'll make sure she's wearing a yellow dress." "Yes."
"A yellow dress called Tippin."
"Yes."
"I will be there tomorrow."
Well, the stepmother was already feeling uncomfortable about this bargain that she had struck. But a bargain is a bargain. Well, Tippin, as we've said, was a very canny girl. And she'd come home while all this was going on, and she'd crept into her room. But when she'd heard her name spoken in such shrill accents by her mother, she crept to the door of that room, and she'd been listening. So that night, after her stepmother went to bed, she went round to the houses of all her friends, and they all lived in one-storey buildings, so she knew where their bedrooms were, and she knocked on the windows of their bedrooms, and she said, tomorrow, 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 if you love me, wear a yellow dress. If you love me, wear a yellow dress. And so it was the next day when the children came out from school, and they were all by the ford, all the children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they were all in yellow dresses.
Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you should come to me.
But the children, they shook their heads, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted, I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
No! Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you come with me, yeah?
But the children, they shook their heads, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted,
I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
Well, so the old man came to the stepmother's house.
My dear.
Yes, my dear sir?
They are all wearing yellow dresses. They
Coincidence!
are all called Tippin G. I
Coincidence!
don't think you can
Of course not, my dear sir. Simply coincidence, pure chance. Tomorrow, she'll be there tomorrow. She'll be wearing a red dress. Yes, a red.
Red tomorrow.
Yes, red.
I will be there.
But Tippin G, by now, she'd figured that something was afoot, and she'd run home from the ford, and she'd been listening. So that night, after her stepmother went to bed, she went round to the houses of her friends, and she knocked on the windows, and she said, tomorrow, 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 if you love me, wear a red dress. If you love me, wear a red dress. And so, the next day, when the old man came to the ford, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all in red.
Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you belong with me.
The children, they shook their heads, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted,
I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
No! Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you belong to me.
But the children, they shook their heads, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted,
I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
Well, this time when the old man came to the stepmother's house, oh, he was angry.
My dear.
Yes,
Don't
ma-
think you can trick me.
What's happened?
They're all wearing red. They're all called Tippin G.
I can't think how it happened.
Tomorrow, I will have a servant. One way or t'other.
My dear sir, tomorrow she'll be wearing a black dress, I promise.
Don't think you can trick me.
Of course not. Well, the stepmother was even more profoundly uncomfortable. But a promise is a promise, and some oaths cannot be broken. But Tippin G, she'd run home. She'd been listening at the door, and that night she went out to the houses of her friends, and she said, tomorrow, 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 if you love me, wear a black dress. If you love me, wear a black dress. And so when the old man came to the ford, all the children of the village seemed to be in black.
Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you are mine, you hear? Mine!
But the children, they shook their heads, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted, I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
No! Which of you is Tippin G? For Tippin G, you are mine for all of time.
But the children, they shook their heads, and they laughed, and they clapped their hands, and they shouted,
I'm Tippin G! She's Tippin G! We're all Tippin G!
And this time when he came to the stepmother's house,
My dear,
yes?
they're all wearing black. You belong to me.
And he took the stepmother away with him to the forest to live there and be his servant, and nobody ever heard anything more of her ever again. But, as we've said before, Tippin G, she knew how to run that house. And so, she was going to live there, in her father's house, with her and her father's things. And that evening she invited all the friends around to her house who helped save her bacon. And they had a most amazing party. People brought cakes, and cool fizzy drinks, and sweets, and all manner of good things.